By early March of 1945, the Allies had crushed German resistance west of the Rhine. The once mighty Wehrmacht was retreating across its own homeland, desperate to hold the last natural barrier between the advancing Allied armies and the heart of Germany, der Rhine. Every bridge over the river had been wired for demolition. Hitler had ordered that none be allowed to fall into enemy hands, but fate and failure collided at one span, the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen. It was a bridge built for war, a double-track railroad crossing lined with towers and steel trusses. Designed to move Kaiser Wilhelm's armies across the Rhine, it now stood between the U.S. 9th Armored Division and a potential shortcut into the Ruhr, Germany's industrial core. The Germans were determined to destroy it. The Americans were determined to seize it. This is the true story of how a handful of engineers, tankers, and infantrymen took a bridge that wasn't supposed to exist by nightfall. Their success shortened the war. Their courage made history. The road into Remagen was quiet but not peaceful. Burned-out trucks and crumpled stone farmhouses lined the shoulders. The sound of distant gunfire still echoed off the hills. For the men of the U.S. 9th Armored Division, the Rhine had always been the finish line. The assumption from top to bottom was that every bridge across it would be rubble by the time they arrived. But just after noon on March 7, 1945, that assumption was shattered. Lieutenant Karl Timmermann stood beside his half-track, binoculars pressed to his face. He stared in disbelief. Through the drifting smoke, the silhouette of the Ludendorff Bridge stretched across the Rhine, still standing. It was damaged, blackened in places, but standing. He handed the binoculars to his sergeant without a word and walked toward the front of the column. Radios came alive behind him. Scouts confirmed it. Somehow the Germans hadn't blown the bridge. Not yet. Timmermann's orders came down within minutes. Take the bridge. He looked at the structure again. Long, exposed, and rigged with explosives. His thoughts turned cold. It could go at any second, he muttered. Across the river, in the tunnel beneath the Erpeler Lay cliffs, German officers Willy Brach and Karl Friesenhahn were trying to do just that, blow the bridge. Friesenhahn twisted the detonator handle at exactly 3:20 p.m. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. The wires had likely been severed by American artillery. Frantic, they looked for a way to finish the job. Corporal Anton Faust volunteered to run out and light the charges by hand. 90 yards under fire, he lit the primer cord and ran back. The explosion thundered across the river, but when the smoke cleared, the Ludendorff Bridge was still there. Damaged, scorched, but unbroken. Timmermann didn't hesitate. He gathered what many had, mostly infantry from a company, 27th Armored Infantry Battalion, and pointed toward the span. Sherman tanks opened fire on the far towers, trying to suppress German machine guns. Timmermann issued the order, "We move now." The soldiers looked at the bridge, then at each other. The structure had already been rigged once and partly detonated. Nobody could know if more charges were hidden in the beams, waiting. Every step forward might be their last. What ran through their minds? Maybe the image of their families. Maybe a prayer. Maybe nothing at all. But they went. Sergeant Mike Chinchar led men along the catwalk, stepping over broken planks, hugging the steel girders. Engineers followed behind, clipping wires, tossing charges into the river, working fast and blind. Every second felt like an eternity. Then came Sergeant Alexander Drabik. He didn't crawl. He didn't wait. He ran. Drabik tore down the center of the bridge, exposed from every angle. Machine gun fire snapped all around him, bits of wood and metal flying past. He ran full speed, eyes locked on the far side, not knowing if the bridge would explode beneath his feet. Would you have done it? Would you have crossed a bridge that could vanish in flame mid-step? Drabik did. And behind him came more. American boots hit the eastern bank of the Rhine. The last time a foreign army had crossed into Germany at that river was 140 years earlier. Napoleon's troops in 1805. This time it wasn't Caesar, not Charlemagne, not Bismarck, not the French emperor. This time it was Americans. Bullets clattered against the steel trusses as the first wave of American infantry charged onto the Ludendorff Bridge. The air was thick with smoke and the deafening roar of machine gun fire. From the stone towers on the far side, German gunners fired in sweeping arcs, trying to cut down the Americans before they could reach the center. Lieutenant Karl Timmermann crouched low behind a bridge girder, scanning for wires, charges, anything that could still ignite. The explosion earlier had twisted metal and torn holes through the planking, but everyone knew more demolitions could be hidden underneath or inside the piers. Every step forward felt like a gamble with death. From the catwalk on the left side, Sergeant Mike Chinchar led his platoon pillar to pillar, using the bridge supports as cover. He shouted orders between bursts of enemy fire, directing his men to search for explosives while firing back at the towers. One by one, they ripped German charges free and tossed them into the river below. A sudden burst of rifle fire from the far bank cut through the noise. German snipers had taken up positions in nearby houses and a half-sunken boat on the east bank. American tanks responded instantly. One Sherman from the 14th Tank Battalion fired a high-velocity round that turned the boat into splinters. Other tanks zeroed in on the east bank and began shelling anything that moved. Then came the engineers. Lieutenant Hugh Mott, Sergeant Eugene Dorland, and Sergeant John Reynolds arrived with wire cutters, pliers, and nerves of steel. Without hesitation, they dropped below the bridge, crawling along girders over the Rhine. The water roared beneath them as they searched for live charges. Beneath their feet hung steel bundles of explosives, connected by long cables that ran like veins through the structure. Dorland shouted back, "Found a live one!" "Cut it and toss it," Mott barked. One by one they diffused charges, some massive, others small but deadly. Mott found a steel pipe that had once housed the detonating cable to the main explosive. It had been sheared in half, likely by an American shell. The engineers weren't alone for long. More infantry arrived. Sergeant Joe DeLisio ran under the bridge, directing fire and clearing charges. Behind him came more men from a company, their rifles up, boots pounding the planks. Above them, the tower on the east end of the bridge still bristled with resistance. That changed when Sergeant Drabik's squad reached the end and kicked in the door. Inside, a German machine gun team surrendered. The east tower was theirs. Timmermann himself reached the far bank, his heart racing. Just ahead, he saw Dorland reach the final switch box, a black junction of wires and triggers. Without ceremony, Dorland smashed it with the butt of his rifle. Seconds later, the last major threat to the bridge was secured. Men streamed across in ones and twos, then by the dozen. For now, the span held. Behind the eastern tower, Lieutenant Emmett Burrows and his platoon moved quickly along the embankment at the base of the Erpeler Lay. The steep rock face loomed above them, but their focus was straight ahead. The entrance to the railway tunnel was less than 100 meters from the bridge. German snipers fired sporadically from nearby buildings in the hillside, but most of the defenders had already begun to retreat inside the tunnel. As Burrows and his men advanced, a sudden burst of mortar fire struck near the path, forcing them to dive for cover. Regrouping under fire, they pressed on, determined to block the tunnel before more Germans could escape or organize a counterattack. Inside that tunnel, Captain Brach stared at the chaos unfolding. The Americans had taken the bridge, their tanks were crossing. The east end of the tunnel, already under fire, was sealed off. His men, many of them wounded or barely out of training, looked to him for direction. But there was none. The civilians hiding with them were screaming. One boy had been hit by shrapnel. Another man waved a white flag fashioned from a torn blanket. Outside, American soldiers shouted for surrender. A burst of machine gun fire ripped into the tunnel entrance, followed by the thud of a grenade, and then silence. Captain Brach looked to Lieutenant Friesenhahn, who said nothing. Both men knew it was over. A white flag rose shakily from the darkness. There would be no counterattack, only surrender. As American troops approached cautiously, weapons raised, they were met not just by soldiers, but by frightened civilians, old men, women, even wounded teenagers, who had been sheltering deep inside the tunnel with the German troops. The sight gave many of the Americans pause. Quiet relief settled over them. Had they pressed harder, fired longer, they might have killed innocents along with the enemy. Back on the bridge, the sky grew darker with smoke and fading light. The initial explosion had torn a gap in the western approach, forcing engineers to work quickly to shore up the path. As dusk settled, they laid steel planking over the damage, hammering it into place under the watchful eyes of riflemen. Only then did the first vehicles, jeeps, trucks, and tanks, begin to inch forward. The impossible was no longer theory. It was steel, motion, and momentum. The Americans hadn't just found the bridge, they had taken it. The capture of the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen stunned both sides. Within 24 hours, thousands of American troops and vehicles poured across the Rhine, shattering the illusion that Germany's natural border was secure. For the men who took the bridge, the war did not end there. Fighting continued eastward, brutal and unrelenting. But Remagen marked a turning point, a breach into Hitler's heartland that no one expected and that German command could not recover from. 10 days later, the bridge collapsed from cumulative damage. By then, the Allies had built multiple pontoon bridges alongside it. The war moved swiftly toward its end. For a brief moment, a single structure altered the course of history. The Ludendorff Bridge, battered but still standing, became the gateway into the heart of Germany. The men who ran into fire to take that bridge didn't just win a battle, they helped end the war sooner. And in doing so, they likely saved thousands of lives, Allied soldiers, German civilians, and prisoners in the camps whose time was running out. What they did in those first moments, crossing a bridge rigged to explode, remains one of the war's boldest acts of courage.